Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Spectre here for another edition of Midnight Rider. This has been quite a bang-up week, of course. If you've been paying attention, all sorts of stuff going on. Everything from Biden signing executive orders up the wazoo to all sorts of stuff going on with the Redditors and GameStop and all that's going on there. And, oh, by the way, behind the scenes, we had this little thing called Davos and the World Economic Forum going on. So that's exactly what we're going to focus on here tonight. Bring you up to speed on all of the goings on there. Davos, World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, the Klaus Schwab, Xi Jinping's, Vladimir Putin, Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel, and more, all of which spoke this past week. So stick around, and we'll see you back here on the other side. Warning. The media platform your help. Censorship. Pain. This day by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back everybody. Like I said, tonight we've got an interesting broadcast for you, and that we're going to cover all that happened this past week by way of Davos, World Economic Forum, all the good stuff happening through the virtual meeting that they had in Davos this year, because COVID, of course. And of course, probably about May time, they'll actually gather in live person, I believe down in... where is it? Down in Southeast Asia portion, I suppose, and meet down there. So we'll get to do it all over again. We'll see what happens. I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're joining live over on YouTube, we're up there. Over on Twitch as well. Over on DLive, see a couple of you guys checking in there. And of course, over on Old Tiger Network this evening as well. Appreciate you guys tuning in. So that being said, let's just get into it here this evening. A lot to get through. Starting off the week, Xi Jinping was one of the first ones to lead off from China. And we had this out of WorldNet Daily. It says, Davos, the Great Reset Conference opened by China's Xi. The communist leader urges world to stand united and work together. Very interesting. So the World Economic Forum opened a virtual conference on Monday featuring its Great Reset initiative with a speech from China's President and General Secretary of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping. WEF founder Klaus Schwab introduced Xi by commending China for its many initiatives undertaken in the spirit of creating a world where all actors assume a responsible and responsive role. And I've got some video highlights in that we'll get to here after a bit as well. Mr. President, I believe this is a time to reset our policies and to work jointly for a peaceful and prosperous world, Schwab said. Schwab's reference to reset is the Great Reset of capitalism. He called for last year to reform the world's democratic systems in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Because what's a crisis without letting that go to waste, right? Is that all cover for what was to come? Perhaps. Schwab, who hosts the annual conference in Davos, Switzerland, of the world's most influential political and business leaders, said in his introductory remarks that 2021 will be the critical year to reestablish trust in our ability to shape our common future in collective and constructive ways. All about the collective, right? In view of this objective, he said, it was his honor to introduce the communist leader. Due to COVID-19, the in-person conference in the Swiss Alps has been replaced this year by the virtual Davos agenda conference this week, followed by an in-person Davos in Asia summit in Singapore in May. So there we go, down in Singapore, that's right. Schwab said in the last 4 years since Xi's historic speech in Davos 2017, the world has become more independent and more fractured and polarized. No doubt alluding to the global leadership of President Trump, who confronted China economically and politically. Schwab said polarization has created the age of disagreement which threatened to derail humanity. Au contraire, mon frere. We'll get into that here momentarily. Now we must come together to ensure that we capture the moment and move into the age of collaboration to build a better world, the WEF founder said. In his remarks, Xi urged the global community to put differences aside, warning history shows countries that go it alone will always fail. As we cope with the current crisis and endeavor to make a better day for everyone, we need to stand united and work together, the Chinese leader said. We have been shown time and again that to beggar thy neighbor, to go it alone, and to slip into arrogant isolation will always fail. Let us all join hands and let multilateralism light our way toward a community with a shared future for mankind, said Xi. After engaging in a trade war and designating China the number one U.S. enemy, the Trump administration closed with declaring the communist regime is committing genocide against its Muslim Uyghur population. And of course we can see the opening here, which I've already got queued up, so I'll just let the first few minutes play through.
Distinguished heads of state and government, Your Excellencies, dear partners and members of the World Economic Forum, dear participants and friends, a very warm welcome to all of you to the opening of the Davos Agenda Week. I'm delighted that such a great global audience is joining us today, bringing together key leaders from politics, business, and all aspects of society. 2021 is a pivotal year, decisive in so many ways to shape our future. 2021 will be the critical year to re-establish trust in our ability to shape our common future in collective and constructive ways. We must win the fight against the virus. We must reinvigorate global economic growth and make it more robust, more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable. And at the same time, we must accelerate the transition to a net zero economy. In view of this objective, it's my distinct honor and great privilege to introduce our opening speaker of the Davos Agenda Week, His Excellency Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China. Mr. President, we all remember your historic speech in Davos in 2017. And unfortunately, in the last 4 years, the world has become in many ways even more interconnected, even more interdependent, but at the same time, more fractured and more polarized. Polarization has created the age of disagreement, which threatens to derail humanity. Now, we must come together to ensure that we capture the moment and move into the age of collaboration to build a better world. Mr. President, I could mention many initiatives that China has undertaken in the spirit of creating a world where all actors assume a responsible and responsive role. Mr. President, I believe this is the best time to reset our policies and to work jointly for a peaceful and prosperous world. We all welcome now His Excellency Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China.
And that's a good place to pause because I do have some other articles that will highlight some snippets from Xi Jinping's speech in that he gave clear back on Monday now. But did you notice what Klaus Schwab said? You know, using the typical buzzwords in that around sustainable and all the things of that nature. Everything that has to do with the old Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050 type goals, all the sustainable business, right? Green technologies, all this stuff. That's exactly what they have in mind. And by the way, remind me again, who elected Klaus Schwab again? Anyone? In any case, every country, industry must be transformed. Introducing the Great Reset Initiative last June, Schwab wrote that the COVID-19 lockdowns may be gradually easing, but anxiety about the world's social and economic prospects is only intensifying, warning a sharp economic downturn has already begun, and we could be facing the worst depression since the 1930s. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economies, from education to social contracts and working conditions, Klaus said at the time. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate, and every industry, from oil and gas to tech, must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism, he said. The United States, however, achieved the V-shaped recovery in gross domestic product promised by President Trump with a record 33.1% GDP increase in the third quarter at an annualized rate after a 32.8% dive in the second. But the World Economic Forum said in December the need in a post-coronavirus world for global leaders to come together to design a common recovery path and shape the Great Reset has never been greater. Unique window of opportunity. On its Great Reset webpage, the World Economic Forum states that as the world enters a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of a global commons. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of the leaders engaged across the forum's communities, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being. And so this continues on. Kerry, Biden will propel the Great Reset, of course. In November, WorldNet Daily reported former Secretary of State John Kerry and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said a Joe Biden presidency would help propel the Great Reset plan. The notion of a reset is more important than ever before, Kerry said in a WEF panel. I personally believe we're at the dawn of an extremely exciting time. Kerry said Biden is ready to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which would help drive the Great Reset. But rejoining Paris is not enough, Kerry said. The Biden administration will focus on every sector of the American economy, he said. There will be a 2035 goal to achieve net neutrality with respect to power and production. Kerry said the U.S. is ready to come back in and help to lead and raise the ambition in Glasgow to accelerate this incredible capacity for a transformation in the private sector. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the White House coronavirus advisor, has called for radical changes in the infrastructure of human existence in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. He made the statement in an article, the scientific journal Cell. At a conference at Yale University in October, Fauci was asked when the nation would go back to normal. He said Americans won't be wearing masks forever, but probably would need to continue with masks and social distancing measures through 2021. We just can't go wherever we want, he said. Fauci said the United States needed to increase international engagement. And the final garrison. Meanwhile, Roman Catholic Archbishop Carlo Maria Vignano, a former papal ambassador to the United States, warned President Trump in October that he is the final garrison against the Great Reset. In an open letter to Trump, the Archbishop said globalists are creating a health dictatorship to combat the virus, threatening the sovereignty of nations and religious freedom. Last week, Cardinal Raymond Burke called the Great Reset an attempt to manipulate citizens and nations through ignorance and fear, as Marxist materialism takes hold in the United States, Newsmax reported. Burke, the former Archbishop of St. Louis and now a member of the highest judicial authority in the Roman Catholic Church, said in a homily December 12th, that the worldwide spread of Marxist materialism now seems to seize the governing power over our nation. Vigano wrote a letter to Trump in May warning that the COVID-19 pandemic was being used to usher in a world government, stripping people of their freedoms. In a letter in June, he encouraged Trump in his fight against the deep state. So that's kind of a opener, as it were, to the whole week, kind of setting the tone. And of course, each and every one of those is right. If you've paid attention here this week, you know that Green New Deal initiatives are probably not too far off, whether it be through executive decree by, as somebody put in chat here, His Excellency. Well, I don't know if it'll come by way of Xi Jinping, but the Excellency of Biden. Yeah, right. Say that tongue-in-cheek. But aside from that, you may have seen this week that by 2035, consequently, GM plans to phase out the internal combustion engine. That means no more gas, no more oil. Everything's electric, right? Just one problem. Where is all that electricity going to come from to power all this stuff when we can barely power what we have today? What about the rolling blackouts and things of that nature in California? How well is that working out? Just a couple questions I might have, but I digress. In any case, carrying on here, we get into Sputnik having this as well. We find out that Xi Jinping urges world to reject new Cold War, tackle COVID-19 global crises at WEF 2021 in Davos. The speech comes as nations battle the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and struggle with economic downturns caused by national lockdown restrictions. Reports anticipate a reset in relations with the newly appointed Biden administration amid the ongoing trade war, it was reported at the event. So, Chinese President Xi Jinping opened the World Economic Forum 2021 in Davos, Switzerland, with a keynote speech urging deeper cooperation on the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and strengthening multilateralism among nations. And I'm not going to bother with the Periscope version of this. There are a couple snippets in that I'll hit. This is the full length. The Chinese president said there was a need to balance COVID-19 measures with global economic development, as well as for global economies to adjust growth models and improve their structures. Guided by science, reason, and humanitarian spirit, the world has achieved initial progress in fighting COVID-19. That said, the pandemic is far from over, he said, adding, winter cannot stop the arrival of spring, and darkness can never shroud the light of dawn. Dark winter, you say, huh? Very interesting. I think we've heard that term a time or two before, have we not? He also called on countries to abandon ideological prejudice and follow a shared path of peaceful coexistence, mutual benefit, and win-win cooperation. Difference in itself is no cause for alarm. What does ring the alarm is arrogance, prejudice, and hatred, he said. President Xi urged for global economies to narrow the divide between developing and developed nations, as well as strengthen equality to allow people to benefit from opportunities in economic development. Xi also called on countries to enhance global public health governance, stating global problems could not be solved by any one country alone, adding cooperation with the World Health Organization, who is crucial to boosting global health. Really? I seem to recall Trump pulling us out of there because they could not be trusted. But hey, I digress. The World Trade Organization should also be reformed, he said, adding issues on global affairs should be resolved via consultation. And obviously that's probably a response because guess who instituted a bunch of tariffs against China? Yeah. To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten, or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruptions, or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation, the Chinese president said. President Xi closed his address urging global powers to strengthen cooperation and avoid closed and protectionist approaches to international relations. So I'll let this play through.
First, we should stay committed to openness and inclusiveness instead of closeness and exclusion. Multilateralism is about having international affairs addressed through consultation, and the future of the world decided by everyone working together. To build small circles or start a new Cold War, to reject, threaten, or intimidate others, to willfully impose decoupling, supply disruption, or sanctions, and to create isolation or estrangement will only push the world into division and even confrontation. We cannot tackle common challenges in a divided world, and confrontation will lead us to a dead end.
So there you have it in the words of Xi Jinping. Says, we have been shown time and again that to beggar thy neighbor, to go it alone, and to slip into arrogant isolation will always fail. Let us all join hands and let multilateralism light our way toward a community with a shared future for mankind, he said. The speech is the second keynote address President Xi delivered after speaking at the World Economic Forum in 2017. Now, China's rise in an emerging global order. The comments come amid developments in the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, namely after China's National Bureau of Statistics reported last week a 2.3% growth rate in 2020, adding strict measures to tackle COVID-19 along with emergency stimulus for businesses helped the nation to recover. The Chinese economy also grew 6.5% last quarter, according to the NBS. And I guess I'll digress there real quick and say if those numbers are to be believed, mainly because half of those numbers are half-baked and not necessarily true. But again, I digress. China also inked the $26.2 trillion Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, known as RCEP, and China-EU Cooperative Trade Agreement, the CTA, are the world's largest global and bilateral agreements, respectively, sparking concern in the newly appointed Biden administration. And for those that don't know, that is all part of the One Belt, One Road, or the Belt and Road Initiative stuff that has been going on for the better part of the last 4 years now. The deals are widely seen as a major boost to China's standing in the global economy amid tensions with Washington in the U.S.-China trade war, which targeted numerous mainland tech firms, including Huawei, ZTE, and SMIC in recent months. Beijing also announced plans to further expand partnerships in Europe and the Middle East in its 15-member RCEP deal. So there you have it. Again, this is advancing China, bringing them up, as it were, into more of a superpower status, more trade, and along those lines, further expanding their ambitions via the One Belt, One Road initiative that is spread across the Middle East and now into Europe. So continuing along that thread out of Sign of the Times, after COVID, Davos moves to Great Reset. Says, with the USA Biden presidency, Washington has joined the global warming agenda of the Paris Accords. With China making loud pledges about meeting strict CO2 emission standards by 2060, now the World Economic Forum is about to unveil what will transform the way we all live and what WEF head Klaus Schwab calls the Great Reset. Make no mistake, this all fits into an agenda that has been planned for decades by old wealth families such as Rockefeller and Rothschild. Brzezinski called it the end of the sovereign nation state. David Rockefeller called it one world government. George H.W. Bush in 1990 called it the New World Order. Now we can better see what they plan to impose. And the key words here, if we allow. The Great Reset of the World Economic Forum is a 21st century rollout for a new form of global total control. We only have one planet, and we know that climate change could be the next global disaster with even more dramatic consequences for humankind. We have to decarbonize the economy in the short window still remaining and bring our thinking and behavior once more into harmony with nature, declared WEF founder Schwab about the January 2021 agenda. The last time these actors did something at all similar in scope was in 1939 on the very eve of World War II. So War and Peace studies. At that time, the Rockefeller Foundation financed a top-secret strategy group working out of the New York Council on Foreign Relations. It was known as the War and Peace Studies and headed by America's Haushofer geographer Isaiah Bowman of Johns Hopkins University. Before German Panzer tanks had even rolled into Poland, they were planning a post-war world where the United States would emerge as the sole victor and replace the British as the global hegemonic power. Formulation of a U.S.-dominated United Nations and Bretton Woods monetary order based on the dollar was part of their project, and in 1941, as America formally entered the war, the CFR group sent a memo to the U.S. State Department. If war aims are stated, which seem to be solely concerned with Anglo-American imperialism, they will offer little to people in the rest of the world. The interests of other people should be stressed. This would have a better propaganda effect. That successful project has been the framework of what Henry Luce in 1941 called the American Century, and lasted until quite recently. Now, those same families, again including the Rockefeller Foundation and the Rothschilds, in the person of Linda Rothschild's Council for Inclusive Capitalism with the Vatican, are moving to create the next generation in their pursuit of global domination. It's being called the Great Reset. It requires global government, a plank significantly endorsed by the Jesuit Pope Francis. Its PR man, Klaus Schwab, is a self-admitted protege of Rockefeller insider Henry Kissinger from their days 50 years ago at Harvard. Oh, and Build Back Better? Where have we heard that term before? None other than Biden's campaign, right? Sounds very similar. In May 2020, as the coronavirus had caused global panic lockdowns far beyond the initial outbreak in Wuhan, the British Crown Prince Charles, together with the World Economic Forum founder Klaus Schwab, unveiled what they gleefully named the Great Reset. Increasingly, world political and business leaders are using terms such as the Great Reset or the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the call to Build Back Better, which the Biden administration prefers. They are all anchored on the same set of dramatic global changes. The U.S. Green New Deal and the EU European Green Deal are all part of it. The most striking fact about the agenda of the Great Reset is that it is being advanced by the same giga-rich plutocrat families responsible for the flaws of the present world economic model. So basically, do more of the same and throw more money at it and it'll work better this time, right? Makes sense. They, not we, have created ruin over organic fields and nature with their Roundup, glyphosate, and toxic pesticides. They have ruined the air quality in our cities by the transportation models they force on us. They created the free market model of globalization that has ruined the industrial base of the United States and the industrial EU nations. Now, as they blame us for an alleged catastrophic emission of CO2, we're being conditioned to accept guilt and be punished in order to save the next generation for Greta and friends. So the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Behind the seductive rhetoric of the powers that be on creating a quote-unquote sustainable world lies an agenda of raw eugenics, depopulation on a scale never before tried. It is not human. In fact, some call it transhuman. In 2016, WEF head Schwab wrote a book titled Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In it, he describes the technological changes coming with the Fourth Industrial Revolution of 5G smartphones, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence that link everything to make the most banal decisions for us, such as buying more milk or turning down the stove. At the same time, data is centralized in private corporations such as Google or Facebook to monitor every breath we take. Schwab describes how new generation technologies, already being rolled out by Google, Huawei, Facebook, and countless others, will allow governments to intrude into the hitherto private space of our minds, reading our thoughts, and influencing our behavior. Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies will not stop at becoming part of the physical world around us. They will become part of us, said Schwab. Today's external devices, from wearable computers to virtual reality headsets, will almost certainly become implantable in our bodies and brains. Schwab adds, what the Fourth Industrial Revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, digital, and biological identity. Among those fusion technologies are active implantable microchips that break the skin barrier of our bodies, Schwab explains. These implantable devices will likely also help to communicate thoughts normally expressed verbally through a built-in smartphone, and potentially unexpressed thoughts or moods by reading brainwaves and other signals. I don't know about you, but I am not eager to have the state or Google read my brainwaves. And of course, how about controlling our food? Well, the confusing aspect for many is the plethora of front groups, NGOs, and programs which all lead to the same goal: the drastic control over every member of society in the name of sustainability. UN Agenda 2030. Nowhere is it more ominous than in their plans for the future of our food. After creating the present system of globalized, industrialized agriculture, agribusiness, a project began in the 1950s by the Rockefeller Foundation. The same circles now advocate sustainable agriculture, which will mean a shift to genetically edited fake foods, lab-made synthetic meats, and such, even including worms and weeds as new food sources. And oh, by the way, folks, if you like grub worms or locusts, guess what? That's all coming. New sources of protein. You wanted a steak for dinner? No. How about that grub worm fake meat? Just a thought. The WEF's Schwab has partnered with something called Eat Forum, which describes itself as a Davos for food that plans to set the political agenda. EAT was created in Sweden in 2016 with support from the UK Wellcome Trust, established with funds from GlaxoSmithKline and the German Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Didn't I cover a piece about the UK Wellcome Trust, their ties to eugenics, and all the stuff pertaining to the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccines? Yeah, you can find that here in the archives that I've done to find out a little bit more about that. So, lab-grown synthetic gene-edited meats are being supported, among others, by Bill Gates, the same one backing Moderna and other genetically edited vaccines. EAT works, among others, with Impossible Foods and other biotech companies. Impossible Foods was initially co-funded by Google, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. Recent lab results showed the company's imitation meat contained toxic glyphosate levels 11 times higher than its closest competitor. Well, that's interesting. So we got lab-grown meat, 11 times higher in glyphosate. How is all that getting in there? In 2017, EAT launched Fresh, Food Reform for Sustainability and Health, with the backing of Bayer AG, one of the world's most toxic pesticide and GMO producers that now owns Monsanto. The China-owned GMO and pesticide giant Syngenta, Cargill, Unilever, DuPont, and even Google. This is the planned food future under the Great Reset. Forget the traditional family farmer. In his 2020 book on the Great Reset, Schwab argues that biotechnology and genetically modified food should become a central pillar to global food scarcity issues which COVID has exacerbated. He is pushing GMO, and especially the controversial gene editing. He writes, global food security will only be achieved if regulations or genetically modified foods are adapted to reflect the reality that gene editing offers a precise, efficient, and safe method of improving crops. Gates, a project partner with Schwab since years, has argued the same. EAT has developed what it refers to as the planetary health diet, which the World Economic Forum champions as the sustainable dietary solution of the future. But, according to Frederick Leroy, a food science and biotechnology professor at University of Brussels, the diet aims to cut the meat and dairy intake of the global population by as much as 90% in some cases, and replaces it with lab-made foods, cereals, and oil. Like everything else with the Great Reset, we will not be given a real choice in food. EAT notes it will be forced on us by hard policy interventions that include laws, fiscal measures, subsidies and penalties, trade reconfiguration, and other economic and structural measures. We will all be forced to eat the same synthetic diet or starve. And to that I say, bullshit. Nah, we have these things called seeds, and we will grow our own. Here's a big F you to that. This is just a hint of what is being prepared under the guise of COVID-19 lockdowns and economic collapse, and 2021 will be a decisive year for this anti-human agenda. The introduction of AI, robots, and other digital technologies will enable the powers that be to dispose of hundreds of millions of workplaces. Contrary to their propaganda, new jobs will not be sufficient. We will become increasingly redundant. In other words, we're just bottom feeders and useless sheep that need to be fed. That's what they mean by that. This all seems too surreal until you read from their own descriptions. The fact that the cabal of the world's most influential corporations and billionaires sit on the board of WEF with Kissinger's student Klaus Schwab, along with the head of the UN and of the IMF, with the CEOs of the world's largest financial giants, including BlackRock, Blackstone, Christine Lagarde of the European Central Bank, David Rubenstein of Carlyle Group, Jack Ma, richest billionaire in China, is proof enough this great reset is not being done with our true interests at heart. Despite their silky words, this dystopian agenda is 1984 on steroids. COVID-19 was merely the prelude. And F. William Engdahl is strategic risk consultant and lecturer. He holds a degree in politics from Princeton University and is a best-selling author on oil and geopolitics. Apparently that is out of the New Eastern Outlook. Comment: the world is getting wise to what the elite manufactured Great Reset is all about. So we see this tweet from Selena in PDX says, with everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before. Everything is falling apart? Thank you, WEF, for confirming that y'all are in fact doing all you can to prompt collapse in order to create opportunity for your Great Reset. So don't miss what we may be saying next shoe drop in this process. So, in other words, yes, they manufactured a crisis, as usual. They already had, the plans in place, and voila, out the backside, here comes the Great Reset. Problem, reaction, solution. See how that works? Continuing on, Macron was also at the World Economic Forum this week. Out of Sputnik, we get French President Macron delivers addresses at Davos Virtual Forum. So the Davos Summit convened on Monday, the 25th of January, in an online format for the first time in its 50-year history, in a bid to reshape the global economy in the wake of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, or should I say, shamdemic. Sputnik goes live from Davos, Switzerland, where international leaders have tuned in to discuss various responses to the COVID-19 pandemic during the second day of the forum on Tuesday. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is among the senior politicians who will address the World Economic Forum today. French President Emmanuel Macron will also be addressing the forum today. The theme of the gathering is crucial years to rebuild trust that focus on COVID-19 vaccination programs, job creation, and climate change. And of course, as we said, it kicks off on the 25th and ran through today, the 29th. So let's play a little bit of this through here.
That takes into account this principle of humanity, whether it's on a social or a health point of view. We talked about this last year, and I believe that we will not get out of this pandemic or rather, we will get out of this pandemic only with an economy that thinks more about fighting inequalities. This is basically what I could say briefly. I believe, Mr. President, that you said last year at the ILO meeting that capitalism had become mad. And in the context you describe of a moral economy, what is the role of company philosophy? I published a book today.
Now, I'll pause that there. I do have a couple other pieces in that'll highlight this, of course, talking about the end of capitalism, at least in their minds. I don't know what version of capitalism they are talking about, but certainly the destructive ones in that they have concocted, yes, that likely is coming to an end. Flashing forward here, we got a little bit more from Klaus talking to Angela Merkel.
This is obviously also international cooperation as one of the preconditions for doing just that. Madam Chancellor, a very warm welcome to you, and we're very much looking forward to your address. Thank you, Professor Schwab, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All of you at your screens, COVID-19 has changed the world, and that is also illustrated by this year's Davos format, which is a virtual one. In May, there is to be a physical meeting, but not in Davos, and this time in Singapore. And I just, in my preliminary remarks to Professor Schwab, I said, I hope he's not going to swap the beautiful mountains of Davos for the duration with the skyscrapers of Singapore, although that is obviously a vibrant place in this world.
So yeah, she's going to go on here for a while. There's about 45 minutes of that. We won't cover the whole thing. But nonetheless, more of the same there. Continuing on, we get into this out of Breitbart. Delling poll. Trust us. We're not evil, claims Davos WEF Great Reset promo video. That sounds very much like a snake, and it is. The World Economic Forum wants you to know that there is nothing sinister about its global master plan, aka the Great Reset, for a new world order. It says so in a promo video, released to coincide with its annual Davos Summit, which is taking place online all this week. So I'm going to go ahead and play this here real quick as well.
The pandemic has radically changed the world as we know it, and the actions we take today as we work to recover will define our generation.
Now is the time to think what history will say about this crisis.
2020 has been challenging on a lot of levels, as economic, environmental, and societal frailties have been laid bare. But it's also proved that when we need to, we can act rapidly and restructure our lives.
The recovery from the pandemic is an opportunity. We can see rays of hope in the form of a vaccine, but there is no vaccine for the planet. Nature needs a bailout.
You don't want to go back to the status quo that you had before simply because it was the status quo that got us here.
With everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before, ways that better address so many of the challenges we face. And that's why so many are calling for a great reset. A great reset? That sounds more like buzzword bingo masking some nefarious plan for world domination. Hands up, this kind of slogan hasn't gone down well. But all we really want to say is that we all have an opportunity to build a better world. And it's not surprising that people who've been disenfranchised by a broken system and pushed even further by the pandemic will suspect global leaders of conspiracy. But the world's not that simple. Every one of us has differing priorities, values, and ideas. That's part of why solutions are so hard to come by, and why we all need to be involved in the decision-making. Because whether it's politicians, CEOs, academics, activists, or you, we're all about getting people together, even those you may not like, to sit down at the table and develop solutions that work for all of us. But
an enormous trust between the private sector and the public sector for this to actually work. That trust is hard to come by.
It's time for people to work together, listen to each other, and build this trust so we can move towards a better world. And we really need one. Because while the pandemic affects us all, it's clear it affects some more than others.
The first people who are hit are the people at the front, those who are vulnerable. It is those on the front line who take it first, and that is simply unacceptable.
See, at the start of 2020, 1% of the world's population owned 44% of the wealth. And since the start of the pandemic, billionaires have increased theirs by more than 25%, whilst 150 million people fell back into extreme poverty. And with climate change set to dwarf the damage caused by the pandemic, the message from 2020 should be abundantly clear.
Capitalism, as we know it, is dead. This obsession that we have had with maximizing profits for shareholders alone has led to incredible inequality and a planetary emergency.
But no one can do this alone, and top-down approaches won't get us anywhere, because everything we've learned in our work has shown us that diverse voices lead to better results. And it's for these reasons that the forum talks about something called stakeholder capitalism, which would shift businesses away from just profit. Because
if we want to change where the focus of our recovery will go, then we need a new dashboard for the new economy. And that needs to encompass people, planet, prosperity, and institutions.
Giving people a real stake in the economy and putting well-being before growth. And that's all about getting the right people in the right place at the right time.
We must rebuild our relationship with nature for the survival of the peoples and our planet.
We have a window of time which is closing, and we need everybody who cares to get together and find solutions now.
It's the people who have great ideas and who share them with others. They're the ones who are shaping the future. So if you want to be a part of the change, then tune in, turn on, and get involved. Follow the Davos agenda, right here, online, on YouTube.
Sounds so very nice. Such a happy little deal, doesn't it? Everybody just get involved. In any case, in the video, the WEF admits that some people think that the Great Reset sounds like some nefarious plan for world domination. But nothing could be further from the truth. The video goes on to insist the Great Reset is simply an opportunity to build a better world. If people think otherwise, it claims it's all the fault of the broken system and the pandemic. It's not surprising that people who have been disenfranchised by a broken system and pushed even further by the pandemic will suspect global leaders of conspiracy. So says the WEF. But could there be a more plausible explanation for people's concern about the Great Reset? That they've started to do their homework and don't like what they've discovered? For many years, the annual Davos cavalcade of private jets and limousines was something of a joke. Billionaires coming to tell millionaires how ordinary people should live. But since the Chinese coronavirus pandemic, people have been paying much closer attention to what this annual plutocrats shindig in Davos actually entails. A totalitarian world takeover in which a tiny elite will control every aspect of the lives of ordinary people, reducing them to the status of medieval serfs. In the past, the WEF has not been secretive about its aims. In 2016, it released a video in which it boasted about a future where no one owned any property. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Last year, the WEF's founder, Klaus Schwab, even wrote a book celebrating the pandemic not as a crisis, but an opportunity for a new normal. In COVID-19, the Great Reset, he wrote, at the time of writing, June 2020, the pandemic continues to worsen globally. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory. But what if what most people actually want is not a new normal, but to get to their old lives back as quickly as possible? Neither Schwab nor the people pushing the Great Reset appear to understand this. Their latest video urges, so we can move towards a better world. One of the curious aspects of the video is its criticism that, since the pandemic, the ultra-rich have gotten richer and the poor poorer. Well, gee, why do you suppose that is? Do you think maybe it has anything to do with blue states and some of these countries instituting lockdowns that shut down businesses that would otherwise thrive when people buy and sell from such merchants? Oh, I see. The whole idea is to channel all those dollars into the global big box stores. Hence why you see people like Bezos and company have gotten far richer since March of last year, right? At the beginning of 2020, 1% of the world's population owned 44% of the wealth. Since the start of the pandemic, billionaires have increased theirs by more than 25%, while the 150 million poorest have fallen back into extreme poverty. This may be true, but it's a bit of a hypocritical coming from the WEF, given that so many of its members and speakers belong in the billionaire category that has most benefited from the pandemic. And out of Breitbart London, Dilling Poll, Bojo tweets praise for the Great Reset. Strap in, everyone. 2021 is going to be a wild ride. Indeed, those who have been watching these developments closely even argue that this is the whole point. Dellingpod guest Patrick M. Wood told me he thinks draconian anti-coronavirus measures taken by world leaders at the instigation of the CCP-controlled World Health Organization represent a deliberate and concerted attempt to crush small businesses, empower large corporations, and make ordinary people more dependent on the state. To me, it's highly revealing of the elitist nature of the World Economic Forum that hardly anyone has been watching its panel discussions. Even the week's biggest draw so far, President Xi Jinping of China, has garnered less than 19,000 views for his admittedly uninspiring speech. Comments have been disabled by the WEF for all its panel discussions, suggesting that it is perfectly well aware that most would be negative. The Xi speech has so far got nearly 400 thumbs up, but 1,100 thumbs down. I expect the ratio would be greater if anyone bothered to watch it. Or if probably YouTube wasn't ratioing it behind the scenes through algos and everything else. But I digress. Nor does anyone much seem to care about the creepy music video the WEF has made, clearly at great expense, for it features classical musicians playing at locations all over the world. Massachusetts, Sao Paulo, Drakensberg, Kabul, Afghanistan, Philadelphia, Beijing, Florence, Italy, Vienna, Austria, etc. The video, titled See Me, a global concert / Davos Agenda 2021, has attracted less than 7,200 views so far. Again, comments are off. There is a huge disparity between the impressively high-level names that the World Economic Forum attracts. Speakers at this year's online conference include French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Doom Goblin Greta Thunberg, Dr. Snake Anthony Fauci, etc., and the deeply unimpressive viewing figures. But this should not be taken to mean, as my fellow broadcaster Toby Young has suggested on our London Calling podcast, that the World Economic Forum is an irrelevance. Rather, it's an indication of the remote, elitist, anti-democratic nature of the enterprise. The 1% of the 1% and their sympathizers in businesses and politics all seem to be in agreement that the Great Reset is a great idea. But the fact that no ordinary person shares their enthusiasm seems to bother them not one bit. Again, out of Breitbart London, says Dellingpole, the Green Agenda is the Great Reset. So there you have it. And so many words out of Dellingpole there. I think he's got another piece that I'm going to highlight here towards the end. So continuing on, then we get to Putin. Putin speaks about global security erosion, pandemic, and IT giants' monopolies at the Davos Forum, this by way of Sputnik on the 27th. The Russian president is delivering an address at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos on the 27th of January in an online format mandated by the ongoing pandemic. Global economic restoration after the end of the pandemic is one of the key topics that will be discussed at WEF this week. Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated during his address to the World Economic Forum that the global system of security is currently being eroded. The president praised the recently achieved agreement with the new U.S. administration to extend the last remaining nuclear arms reduction treaty, the New START, for a 5-year period, but noted that many more issues and disagreements between the countries remain unaddressed. New START's extension is undoubtedly a step in the right direction. Still, disagreements continue to intensify. As we all know, the inability to resolve such disagreements triggered a catastrophic Second World War in the 20th century, Putin said. He noted that smaller local conflicts continue to multiply, but expressed hope that a larger war, which might be disastrous for mankind in his opinion, is currently impossible. Still, he warned that the situation might unexpectedly deteriorate if no steps are taken to prevent such a scenario. So in terms of the IT giants are already competing with governments, and one might argue that they are the governments at this point. In a separate remark during his speech, the Russian president stressed the growing impact of IT companies on people's lives, suggesting that the industry's giants are already competing with governments. Putin pointed out that monopolies by these giants border on being highly efficient transnational businesses and manipulating societies the way they see best, while undermining the legitimacy of government institutions. The Russian president specifically brought up recent events in the United States, where a group of tech giants have been labeling posts by former Republican President Donald Trump as inaccurate or fake throughout 2020, and at the end of his term outright banned POTUS from their platforms. Putin argued that in this way, the companies are essentially stripping people of their inalienable right to decide how to live and to freely express their views. Countries should combat COVID-19 pandemic jointly. Putin further urged countries to unite their efforts in combating the coronavirus pandemic. He suggested to create conditions for joint efforts between scientists from around the world working to defeat the disease. The president specifically stressed the importance of boosting the availability of vaccines against coronavirus, adding that a lack of thereof might become a new global threat. Putin called on all nations to provide assistance to African states by providing them with both tests to diagnose and vaccines to stop COVID-19. And of course, I'll pause right there and suggest that, hey, guess what? Who was one of the first ones to get a vaccine out? Well, it was none other than Russia with their Sputnik 5 vaccine. But of course, the Western world, the AstraZenecas, the Pfizers, Modernas, and the like, thumbed their nose at it, didn't they? On Russia's cooperation and common values with Europe. Speaking at Davos, Putin also addressed existing disagreements between Russia and European countries, noting that phobias of the past should not exist in the dialogue between them. Instead, he called on European nations to look into the future and cooperate, arguing that Russia and Europe have much in common. He said, "We share some fundamental features. We have shared culture." The greatest political figures of Europe's recent past pointed at the necessity to develop ties between Europe and Russia, stressing that the latter is, in fact, a part of the former, both geographically and, what is most important, culturally. In the essence, we are one civilization, Putin said. The Russian president expressed confidence that Moscow and Europe are capable of rising above their existing problems and distrust to open a new chapter in bilateral ties. He stated that the Kremlin is ready for it, but added that such love is impossible when it's declared unilaterally. EU-Russian ties have been riddled with disagreements and numerous unfounded accusations from Brussels over the past 6 years, with Moscow repeatedly calling for a reboot in relations. The downward spiral started with European states accusing Russia of sparking a domestic conflict in eastern Ukraine that emerged after a Western-backed coup took place in Kiev. The EU slapped economic sanctions on Russia under the pretext of accusations of meddling in the Ukrainian conflict, with the Kremlin denouncing the claims and responding to the economic measures in a reciprocal manner. So that in the words of Mr. Putin. So over to SGT report that had this, says, where is the line between global businesses and attempts to control society? Putin asks Davos as he calls out power of big tech. So, more of the same, and per RT says technology giants have become powerful rivals to governments, but there are doubts over the benefits for society of their monopoly positions. Russia's President Vladimir Putin told the annual World Economic Forum on Wednesday, where is the line between a successful global business, in-demand services, and consolidation of big data, and attempts to harshly and unilaterally govern society, replace legitimate democratic institutions, restrict one's natural right to decide for themselves how to live, what to choose, what stands to express freely? Putin wondered. We've all seen this just now in the U.S., and everybody understands what I'm talking about, he added. The Russian leader was apparently referring to the crackdown by big tech corporations like Twitter, Facebook, Google, Apple, and Amazon, mostly on Donald Trump and his supporters, during the recent presidential election in the U.S. The companies, which according to some critics sided with Democratic candidate Joe Biden, blocked President Trump's social media accounts over accusations of inciting violence, with the same being done to many pages of groups and individuals who backed him. However, one-sided bias claim voiced by some might be an overestimation. The accounts of Democrat supporters were also subject to restrictions, but on a much smaller scale. Conservative Twitter-like platform Parler was also forced offline, and now there are calls to block the Telegram app as well. These events have shown that big tech companies in some areas have de facto become rivals to the government, Putin said. Billions of users spend large parts of their lives on the platforms, and, from the point of view of those companies, their monopolistic position is favorable for organizing economic and technological processes, the Russian president explained. But there's a question of how such monopolism fits the interest of society, he stressed. So, again, lots of concern by Putin on the overreach, as it were, of the big tech oligarchy at this point. Still continuing on that thread, out of the Moscow Times, geopolitics, sanctions, and social media giants, Putin's Davos speech in quotes. So here's some pieces out of his speech at the time. Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the World Economic Forum in Davos for the first time in more than a decade Wednesday. Speaking amid outcry in the West over the jailing of poisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Putin addressed geopolitical tensions, sanctions, and economic inequality, the growing power of tech giants, and more. Here are the highlights from Putin's virtual address. On global tensions, there is every reason to believe that there are risks of further escalating contradictions. These trends can manifest themselves in nearly every field. Another quote along those lines says the situation can develop unpredictably and uncontrollably if, of course, nothing is done to prevent this from happening. Moreover, there's a chance of a real breakdown in global development that's fraught with a fight of all against all. And also, a global hot conflict is principally impossible now, I hope. It would mean the end of civilization. Talking about populism, says we're witnessing a crisis of previous models and instruments of economic development, increased social stratification both globally and in individual countries. This causes a sharp polarization of public views and provokes the growth of populism, right-wing and left-wing radicalism, as well as other extremes. Continuing, it says, all this inevitably affects the nature of international relations and doesn't add stability and predictability to them. International institutions are weakening, regional conflicts are multiplying, and global security is degrading. Still continuing, says unresolved and growing internal social and economic problems can drive the search for someone to blame for all the troubles and divert citizens' irritation and discontent. Talking about inequality, says the growth of economic problems and inequality split society, giving rise to social, racial, and national intolerance. These tensions break out even in countries with seemingly well-established civil and democratic institutions. It's difficult not to notice the fundamental transformations in the global economy, politics, social life, and technology. The coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated the problems and imbalances that have already accumulated in the world. Continuing, it says, globalization has led to a significant increase in the profits of large multinational and, above all, American and European companies. Who has inherited income? The answer is obviously 1% of the population. And what happened to the lives of the other people? Over the past 30 years, the real income of more than half of several developed countries' citizens have stagnated, while the cost of education and health services has increased. Millions of people, even in rich countries, no longer see the prospect of increasing their incomes. Talking about the tech giants and social media networks. Says there's a lot of talk about this now, especially in relation to the events that took place in the United States during the election campaign. There are no longer just economic giants. In some areas, they are already de facto competing with states. Of course, what we previously covered here says, where's the line between a successful global business with popular services that try to rudely and at their own discretion control society, replace legitimate democratic institutions, and restrict the person's natural rights to decide how to live, what to choose, and what viewpoints to freely express? Talking about the economic recovery, says it's absolutely clear that the world cannot follow the paths of building an economy that works for 1 million people and even for the golden billion, post-Soviet term referring to developed Western nations. Considering the mentioned limitations of macroeconomic policy, further development of the economy will be more based on fiscal incentives, with the key role played by state budgets and central banks. Without effective state actions, many middle-class people, the foundations of any modern society, risk staying without jobs. If 20 to 30 years ago the problem could have been solved by stimulating macroeconomic policies, these mechanisms have essentially exhausted themselves. And last but not least, says first, people should have a comfortable environment to live in. Second, people should be confident that they'll have a job that will give a steadily growing income. Third, people should be confident they'll receive high quality, effective medical care when required. And fourth, children should be able to receive a decent education regardless of family income. Talking about sanctions and multilateralism. Says the use of trade barriers, illegitimate sanctions, financial, technological, and information restrictions is a game without rules that critically increases the risks of a unilateral use of military force. There's the danger. Multilateralism can be understood in different ways, either as pushing through own interest and giving legitimacy to unilateral actions, while others can only nod approvingly, or really unifying sovereign states' efforts to solve specific problems for the common benefit. We'll have to strengthen and develop universal institutions that have special responsibility for ensuring stability and security in the world, for developing rules of conduct in the global economy and trade. It's too early to throw them into the dustbin of history. And on Russian-European relations, he said, Russia is part of Europe, both geographically and, most importantly, in a cultural sense. In fact, we're one civilization. If we can rise above the problems and get rid of phobias, then a positive phase in our relation awaits. We need to return to a positive agenda, that is, Russia's interest. But one-sided love is impossible. So there you have it, a few of the quotes in that via Vladimir Putin this past week. And real quick, back to Xi, the American Spectator had this, talking about Biden. They didn't meet, but actually had a phone call this past week. Xi twists Biden's arm at Davos. The Chinese president pitches his vision of globalism to the world. So Xi Jinping's kickoff appearance at the Winter Davos Week this Monday had a simple message for newly inaugurated President Joe Biden. Bring America back into the fold, or suffer the consequences. The speech, which opened and closed with World Economic Forum Chairman Klaus Schwab heaping praise on Xi, was the Chinese president's first appearance at Davos since he spoke there in 2017. The atmosphere this time around was no less surreal, at least at first glance. What is the strongman leader of the largest communist nation in the world doing headlining the premier event for the world's free trading liberal internationalist elite? Of course, there is no real mystery here. China's use of global organizations to its advantage has been evident as far back as its entry into the World Trade Organization. The WTO's kowtowing to China throughout the coronavirus pandemic was an embarrassment observed by the entire world. In light of the past year, Xi's speech had the tone of a victory lap crossed with a warning directed at the United States. The overarching theme was globalization and transnational integration. The more of it, the better, and no need to read the small print. Building an open world economy, according to Xi, means keeping the global industrial and supply chains stable and open, and upholding the multilateral trading regime. A thinly veiled dig at the hawkish trade policy pursued by the Trump administration in the past 4 years. Such openness would also require taking down barriers to technological exchanges. Technology transfers, both illegal and voluntary, in exchange for business deals, constitute perhaps the single greatest method of wealth extraction by China against the United States. Xi has been keen to push China's interests in other fronts as well. A substantial and perhaps unexpected portion of the speech was dedicated to the worldwide North-South gap, which can be remedied only by giving developing countries stronger representation and voice in global economic governance. Needless to say, China's interests and assets in the global south, particularly Africa, are vast and growing, both as part of the Belt and Road Initiative and through other projects. No doubt, Xi wishes to maintain elite approval of China's international economic agenda. But Xi's push for greater representation for developing countries could come from a place of much greater ambition. China's outsized importance for many African countries means that it has many of them in its pocket when it comes to votes at the UN and WTO and political allegiance on the world stage. Giving stronger representation to the global south, as altruistic as it sounds, is Xi's way of pushing for further strengthening of the Chinese international coalition. At times, the speech veered into parody, such as when Xi implored that the strong should not bully the weak, another dig at the U.S., no doubt, but baldly hypocritical, given China's recent escalation of tensions with nearly every single one of its neighbors over territorial disputes. All in all, the script was thin on policy specifics and thick on textbook platitudes about globalization, as is often the case with the World Economic Forum speeches. What will prove more important than what was said will be the message sent by Xi's appearance. Davos has always been a primarily European event, and the Chinese premier was flanked this year by heavyweights such as French President Emmanuel Macron and outgoing Chancellor of Germany Angela Merkel, as if symbolic of the growing ties between the EU and China. In short, Xi wants the world to believe that it is now China, not the U.S., that forms the linchpin of the international order. He is warning Joe Biden to keep well away from Donald Trump's belligerence, lest the Biden administration be discredited in the eyes of the kinds of people who would attend Davos. What might a Chinese-led international order look like? According to Xi, is one of free of ideological prejudice. In other words, worry less about tyranny or totalitarianism and focus on keeping the gravy train running. That line surely got an extra round of applause out of Klaus Schwab. So there you have it, per Xi Jinping. So again, back to Putin here. Out of Sign of the Times, Putin warns of the gloomy dystopia threatens world at Davos. Again, talking about big tech here. Putin's remarks came one day after he held his first phone call with Joe Biden during his tenure as U.S. president. It is the first time that the Russian leader had spoken to the World Economic Forum since 2009. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday warned against the increasing influence of big tech companies, which he said are competing with states. These are not just economic giants. In some areas they are already de facto competing with states, Putin said, speaking at the Davos Virtual Economic Summit. The Russian leader questioned whether the recent behavior of some U.S. firms in the country's presidential election raised the prospect of tougher regulation. And on Wednesday, the Russian telecommunications regulator Roskomnadzor announced that Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, VKontakte, and Odnoklassniki would all face fines for failing to delete calls for youth to participate in illegal protests across the country on January 23rd. The mass protests were organized by opposition figure Alexei Navalny and his supporters. So, in terms of President Biden's first call with the Kremlin, Putin's remarks came one day after he held his first phone call with U.S. President Joe Biden. The pair agreed to extend the New START nuclear weapons treaty that would have expired next month. No doubt it is a step in the right direction, Putin said. But the Russian leader warned the situation can still develop unpredictably and uncontrollably if we sit on our hands. Originally signed in 2010, the pact limits each side to 1,550 long-range nuclear warheads, a lower number than under a previous deal. Russia's lower house of parliament has already approved the extension, with the country's Senate expected to ratify the move. No congressional vote is required in the U.S. A Kremlin statement said the exchange between the two leaders was businesslike and frank. But the White House's readout of the call with the Kremlin also highlighted the difficult relationship between the former Cold War foes. Aides to the new president said Biden was firm on U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty, while Russia is supporting separatists in the country's east. They also discussed the detention of opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who the U.S. government has called to be freed. It marks a departure from his predecessor's stance. Critics of Donald Trump often accuse the former president of being too deferential to Putin, often undercutting his own administration's diplomatic efforts. But Putin was quoted by the Interfax news agency as saying the case could undermine the possibility of further cooperation between Moscow and the European Union. And so I'll just flash down here to the RT piece and let this play through to kind of sum things up.
Now, there is one other point. Modern technology, digital giants now playing an increasingly higher role We often hear that in conversations, particularly to the election campaign in the US. And these are not just technology giants, not just economic giants. In some areas, they are de facto compete with states. They have billions of users, and people spend a lot of time in those ecosystems. They actually have a monopoly. It may be good for their governance, for their operations, but people wonder, does such a monopoly coincide or isn't in line with social interests? It offers so many services, but it consolidates big data, and it can use the data to manage the community at its own discretion, to observe or limit the rights of the people to live, to choose, to speak out. We have seen that, and we saw it in the US, and everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows what I'm referring to. And I believe that most of the people share this point of view, share my point of view.
So there you have it in the words of Putin. All right, continuing on here, we also get to this out of Citizen Free Press. We'll talk a little bit about what Macron had to say. Got a couple pieces talking about capitalism is over. The Great Reset is here.
We basically created negative externalities with the climate. And so these four phenomena fed the crisis of social inequalities, the crisis of democracies, and the sustainability of the democratic system, and the climate crisis. And so the capitalist model, together with this open economy, can no longer work in this environment. And I believe that we will not get out of this pandemic or rather, we will get out of this pandemic only with an economy that thinks more about fighting inequalities. Many fellow citizens had to face different crises of relocation, especially, and so there were social and economic shocks for hundreds and thousands of people throughout the world, who had this feeling of losing their usefulness, who lost their jobs, and it was a deep moral and economic crisis. And this was externalized by capitalism of the last decades.
Yeah, what a bunch of bull honky that is. In any case, French President Emmanuel Macron warned modern capitalism can no longer work, urging global leaders to focus on tackling inequality and climate change. We will get out of this pandemic only with an economy that thinks more about fighting inequalities, Macron made the comments at the virtual Davos Agenda 2021 summit. And here's another short piece.
Well, capitalism and market economies have proven their successes. We cannot be too quick to throw the first stone here. I mean, we know that it saved many millions of people, and it took many millions of people out of poverty. So it enabled citizens and consumers to have access to goods and services, as it happened very few times in the past. Nevertheless, this all took place with the creation of inequalities in the different societies. So it meant that some people were taken out of poverty, and it took people into the production cycle, but it took out some others from the production cycle. And many fellow citizens had to face different crises.
And of course, in case you need a quick reminder, don't forget that Mr. Macron is none other than one of the globalist proteges. Was that the Rothschild or was that Soros? I forget which one of those that he's a protege of, but nonetheless, it's pretty much all the same at this point. So over to LaRouche Pack, we get this. This kind of sums up the first couple days. Just how close are we to the end of the nation state? Davos days 1 and 2. Again, day one, the Leviathan emerges. Day one of the World Economic Forum 2021 Davos Conference featured a breathtaking display of oligarchical intention to eradicate all national sovereignty and remake the world with the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy in the driver's seat. This year's Davos agenda is a virtual conference taking place online. The postings include video presentations, etc., etc. In this, only the first day of the week-long conference, several major themes were presented, including 1. A kinder, gentler dictatorship. There we go. 2. Goodbye nation-states. 3. China makes its peace with the empire. 4. Global Malthusianism. Number 5. Using COVID to remake human culture. So to highlight some of these as we do this for humanity, in preparations for the conference, a musical video created by the WEF was posted titled See Me, a Global Concert, which fuses performances by orchestras and choirs from around the world during the pandemic. Also goes on to state in a special video, Stakeholder Capitalism, Building the Future, WEF Executive Chairman Klaus Schwab stressed the moment of opportunity for a global mindset change, one where a new society based on stakeholder values can be established. Then there was another video, it's called What is the Great Reset?, directly addressing the conspiracy theories that the Great Reset is a plot by oligarchs to run the world. The soothing tones, a voice dismisses these worries and assures the viewer that the Great Reset is simply the benign results of visionary individuals from all over the planet coming together to create a better world. And of course, they're all elected officials, I'm sure, right? Also talking about ending national sovereignty. Says in the speech of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he explicitly rejects the role of sovereign national government. He says a new social contract within societies is needed to enable people to live in dignity, and a new social contract between governments, people, civil society, businesses, and more must integrate employment, sustainable development, and social protection, and based on equal rights and opportunities for all. He calls for a new global deal, a new model for global governance. In addition to that, the remarks by Gutierrez, many of the other speeches today made clear that nationalism and other efforts to assert national sovereignty are obstacles which must be overcome. Talking about the new paradigm, Xi Jinping's speech included very harsh attacks on the policies of the Trump administration, without mentioning Trump by name, as well as several other unsavory elements. The major theme of the speech was multilateralism, and I think we've pretty well beat that one to death with Xi Jinping. Talking about culling the herd, almost every speech given today declared climate change to be the greatest crisis facing humanity. It was stressed over and over that no nation will be allowed to stand in the way of global action to save the planet. Some of these speeches focused on the issues of carbon emissions, others addressed the issue of sustainable development. Talking about the Re-Education Center, welcome to it. Within the context of the COVID pandemic, the potential to use the crisis to remake human culture was addressed. One panel discussion took up the topic of reimagining education, call to action. Henrietta H. Fore, Executive Director at United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, called for a gender-diverse digital reset on behalf of the Gender Equality Forum. Another panel discussed accelerating racial justice in the workplace. And another panel was titled COVID-19's Widespread Impact on Mental Health. A new coalition was announced at the Davos agenda with 48 companies teaming up to bring racial justice to the workplace. So on to day 2, Europe leads the way to fascism. Fantastic. The shape of the intended new imperial order became more clear on the second day of the conference, although a number of special guests, including Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Angela Merkel from the Administrative Region of Germany, and Emmanuel Macron from the Administrative Region of France, all delivered individual presentations, with the exception of von der Leyen, who these were all window dressing. Merkel and Macron were particularly pathetic in their obeisance to the new imperial order, declaring their fealty to the agenda of multilateralism, net zero carbon emissions, and opposing economic nationalism. Von der Leyen basically voiced the same themes, but given her higher position in the command structure, she spoke with more authority. The meat of the day's proceedings, however, was in the panel discussions, not the speeches. Essentially, what was put forward from several different angles was a plan to compel every nation and all of the productive economy, industry, ag, mining, etc., to submit to the green agenda. A listing of some, but by no means all, of the participants in the Zoom panel discussions is revealing. The IMF, BlackRock, Bank of America, People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China, the Financial Times of London, Banco Santander, Unilever, AXA SA, UBS AG, Salesforce, Bloomberg, the Carlyle Group, Barclays, the Central Bank of France, JP Morgan, etc. Participants were overwhelmingly European, with China, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street as supporting players. Anna Boten, executive chairman of Banco Santander, stated that Europe will lead the way, and she pointed to the recent issuance of EU debt and the $750 billion European Reconstruction Fund as examples of Europe's resolve. She stated that Europe's two priorities will be monetary digitalization and energy transition under the new paradigm of decarbonization. Did you catch that piece? Monetary digitalization? In effect, the central bank digital currencies are just around the corner. Yi Gong of the Central Bank of China stated that China is now committed to a consumer economy model, which will soon make up the bulk of their investment as they move away from non-performing loans. He announced that given the imminent risk of climate change, China will impose green financial standards, issue green bonds and carbon futures, force CO2 emissions disclosures requirements on all businesses, and collaborate with other nations on green finance. Also, a fair amount of time was taken to discuss measures to compel enforcement of a green agenda on the private sector, including manufacturing, mining, transport, and ag. An entire panel was devoted to how blockchain can help the mining and metals industry track and reduce emissions. And that continues on. They say companies should set science-based targets consistent with limiting global average temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius and teaching net zero emissions by no later than 2050. Essentially, the goal is to force every industry to submit. All of the financial reforms will be driven by this green agenda. The financial stimulus packages will continue for a while. Rula Khalaf of the Financial Times call this the magic money tree. But increasingly new financial opportunities and financial instruments will be created around the transition to a green economy. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays, stated the fiscal response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been unprecedented. High levels of liquidity have kept financial markets going through the crisis, and the financial resiliency on display is quite remarkable given the scope of the pandemic. But as economic policy interventions are transitioning from economic life support measures to the stimulus phase, governments have a unique opportunity to influence the direction of economic progress through far-reaching innovation and investment strategies. So that pretty well sums up the first 2 days. And last but not least, to kind of round things out here, by the end of the week, Delingpole highlights his Davos is a madrasa for global eco-fascist tyranny. So again, perhaps Mr. Delingpole needs to go back and listen to that nice video they put forth with the melodramatic music and that to lull him to sleep and say, no, this is not a conspiracy and all that jazz. So to get a better idea of the fundamentally fascist nature of the World Economic Forum plotting global domination online all this week, check out this video from one of its young acolytes.
We all know what's happening with our climate. We all know that there's a fundamental shift underway. The technology exists to make that transition. What we're missing is a force, a collective will to actually make that change, not in an incremental way. And so our main focus is to identify key stakeholders, whether from the corporate world, whether from NGOs, who really get that and who really want to push the boundaries to do transformative work and to hopefully create an unstoppable force.
So yes, back to the article and where that is headed. Says Alexei Levin runs a company called Desalinator, and like all great resetters, just knows that the transition to the fourth industrial revolution must be accelerated immediately. The main problem is that pesky thing called democracy. We all know what's happening with our climate, he says, taking it for granted as the globalist elite do that we're all totally on board with their doomsday prognostications. We all know that there's a fundamental shift underway, he goes on. By this, of course, he means the Great Reset, which he presents here as a fait accompli. Except it isn't a fait accompli, is it? Did you vote for the Great Reset? Did anyone you know vote for the Great Reset? If this fundamental shift really is underway, then it's certainly not something any of us asked for or planned for or should be expected to accept without demurrer. But this is the bit where it gets really scary. The technology exists to make that transition. What we're missing is a force, a collective will to actually make that change, not an incremental way. So our main focus is to identify key stakeholders, whether from the corporate world, whether from the NGOs, who really get that and who really want to push the boundaries, to do transformative work and to hopefully create an unstoppable force. Note that at no point is Levin asking how best to give people what they want. In effect, the free market system which has made us more prosperous and given us more choice. Rather, he is seeking a top-down imposition of something he just knows is good for everyone, whether they like it or not. A tweet via Ben Pyle says, "This is a remarkable admission that the thing lacking from the climate agenda is democracy, and that the likes of WEF and Davos Man want to find a way around that problem without resorting to actually testing collective will." And I think this pretty well highlights what we just covered here. Davos likes to get its claws on them while they're relatively young. Here's another example. The future Chancellor of Austria, pictured in 2015 with the World Economic Forum's sinister cat-stroking mastermind Klaus Schwab on a Global Shapers course. And this was posted by Neil Clark back then. Says, what was the pro-lockdown Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, second from right, doing 5 years ago? He was with Klaus Schwab, third from right, and other global shapers at Davos. All roads in this never-ending lockdown hell lead back to WEF. Kurz was a WEF young global leader like Macron. And there we see him right there. Kurz is routinely described in the media as a conservative and right-wing. So far right, according to a German satirical magazine, that his nickname should be Baby Hitler. But on green issues and the lockdown, Kurz is in complete harmony with the Great Reset agenda. If he really is a conservative, he's certainly not the sort that believes in free markets or freedom of choice. Rather, like so many of the world leaders paying online homage to the megalomaniacal Schwab at his Swiss mountain lair, Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel, even Vladimir Putin, he's just another tool of the globalist movement. By the way, the video of Alexei Levin has had a grand total at the time of writing of 4 views on YouTube, while another one he made 2 days ago has 0 views. Never, ever forget this. The Davos agenda is the agenda of a remote, plutocratic elite which doesn't give a damn for the interests of ordinary folk. We are many, they are few, and therein lies our only hope of salvation. So, there you have it, folks. In a nutshell, everything that transpired over the course of this past week at Davos World Economic Forum, our central planners of sorts at Davos, and again, this was the virtual meeting. I can only imagine what is going to happen between now and their actual meeting in Singapore here in an extra few months, what sort of lovely things they'll have in store. But perhaps, maybe, we're starting to see a little glimmer of hope, a little bit of pushback, right? Whether that be by way of the Redditors and the Wall Street Bets folks and all that jazz going on with all the short selling and taking out the hedge funders. That might introduce a little bit of a problem for those folks and how they can distribute their innumerable funds that they have access to. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, we must fight back against this tyranny as it is. This one world government that's pushing down our throats. Period. So that's what I leave you with here this evening. Appreciate you guys tuning in, as always. Like I said at the beginning of the week, I kind of wanted to get this all put into one show here to kind of highlight the whole week. Hopefully I've done a good job of that. But at the end of the day, make sure you like, share, and subscribe across all the platforms net. And we'll see you back here shortly on the next one. Take care. God bless everybody.